Welcome again to Coastal Matters. This is a special edition of our regular program sponsored by the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy in conjunction with Nantucket Community Television. I'm Sunny Daly. Our guests today are Burton Spruce Balkind and Rick Atherton. Spruce is a member of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy and lead petitioner for Article Number 1 within special town meeting scheduled for October 10th. Rick is a former member of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee, both of which he chaired, and is an advisor to the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. Spruce and Rick are going to help us understand exactly what Article Number 1 on the warrant for Special Town Meeting 2 means, especially for the beaches, why we need it, and what might happen if it passes. So Spruce, I'm going to start with you.
Fire away.
All right. Can you tell me a little bit about Article Number 1? And what it would do?
Article 1 is basically closing the loophole that the select board found in a previous bylaw that was passed at town meeting, which was supposed to stop a private-public partnership or any kind of private use of a public beach without permission of the town of Nantucket. But in the SBPF's approval of their first set of geotubes, the select board did not bring it to the town meeting. They were able to bypass this bylaw that was brought by Kathleen Flanagan Stover by saying it was a private-public partnership, so it was outside the purview of town meeting. And I mean, Rick can get into a lot of the mechanics of the wording of the bylaw, but it basically is to prevent the select board from circumnavigating a vote of town meeting for the private use of a public beach for an erosion control project.
Okay.
Right, just to sort of add to that, I think it was clear in 2012, when the article was passed by town meeting, that everybody thought any project of a private nature would be brought to town meeting for a vote. That was the expectation, and when the expectation was not met, the Board of Selectmen have an opinion from town council, as Spruce said, that it was a public-private partnership. And this amendment to the article wants to make it clear that any private entity seeking to lease or license town-owned beach property must get the approval of town meeting.
So that's really the key, is that connection between town land and private land, and how the voters would.
Yeah, I think the town, when the basic premise here is that the town, whenever it disposes of or changes the use in a substantial way of its property, it's required to go to town meeting. An example was the wind turbine project. 10, 15 years ago now, they had to come to town meeting to seek the authority of town meeting to change the use in the landfill property from landfill purposes to add the wind turbine, and they asked town meeting for that permission.
So has anything like this been voted on before?
Well, the original article in 2012 was clearly voted on and approved by town meeting. And as I say, everybody, or most of the people at that time, expected that any private project on town-owned beaches would require the vote at town meeting. And when that didn't happen, that's what gave rise to this amendment.
Okay. So if we go back to the basics, can you talk a little bit about what town-owned coastal land has to do with an erosion control project?
Well, the article was originally brought, I think it was like in 2008 and 09, was drafted at the time of the beach nourishment project, and there was a wide community concern about that. So the article at that time talked about town-owned coastal property from Great Point down to the lower beach road area in Sconset. And so that's what the article referred to. And the town owns a substantial portion, 2 main lots running from the lighthouse down almost to the village of Sconset. And the erosion control project itself sits largely, in order to be constructed, on the portion of that beach that's owned by the town. And I think a number of citizens feel that when that use is changed from a town beach use into being used for erosion control, that portion should require the vote of town meeting.
Not just the approval of 3 select board members to, get it passed. So that's the gist of the article, just to bring the people back into the equation of what should we do with our public beaches as far as letting license or lease them to private entities. Or as we say in the revised article, any non-governmental entity. Is that what the wording?
Right.
So the legalese essentially is saying give the town voters an opportunity to determine whether this town land should be used for erosion control projects.
It's one of the hurdles that we'll have to pass, yeah.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about erosion control projects and perhaps what their impact would be on the surrounding beaches? I mean, we're talking about geotubes to begin. I'm assuming there'll be other control methods down the road that may come about.
But in this particular area, there are already projects. There's already the 900-foot was approved as a temporary project because of the risk that Baxter Road might be breached in that one section. And that's geotubes. These are large tubes, essentially plastic, filled with sand. And once they're filled with sand and the water drains out, they're almost like cement. And they sit on the beach, a tier of 3 of them, and in some places 4. And they're essentially meant to draw a line in the sand and say that any erosion cannot ever get beyond this point. That's the purpose of the geotubes. Further down, we also have another form of erosion control, which are called core bags. Those are bags filled with sand, which are meant to operate in a more natural method. And there are 2 or 3 lots south of the current geotubes that have those. And when you look at them, they have performed really as they were expected. And they have protected the lots behind them with a different form, what's called soft erosion control protection. They're designed so that if waves get that high and the core bags open, that sand will naturally flow down because it's the sand that comes into the littoral drift that feeds all of our beaches on Nantucket. And once the core bags open up, it's meant to be a natural way to get sand into the beach, which is what would happen to the bluff if there was no erosion control. That's what feeds the beach in Sconset, that's what feeds beaches to the north and to the south around the South Shore.
So you're talking about the natural erosion, and then specifically this one is a soft structure.
Right. The core bags are soft, but the geotubes are what are referred to as hard structures. Mm-hmm. They're almost equivalent in terms of their performance to rocks. And as I say, once they do not naturally, without mitigation, which Sconset Beach is providing, without that mitigating sand being placed on top of the geotubes and allowed to run off and go into the littoral drift, they wouldn't be approved at all because they would just be hard structures. Eventually erosion would come up to the geotubes, hit them, and there would be no beach in front of them. The mitigation will help that to some extent, but the problem is most of the sand that goes into the littoral drift comes about through storm action. And once the sand that was placed there for mitigation is gone and the storm continues, no more sand is entering into the littoral drift. And that's one of the basic problems with the design here.
And the Conservation Commission, who oversees this project probably more than any other Nantucket governmental body, has raised a lot of serious questions about that. That's one of their primary concerns, is the fact that this last year, anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks, the geotubes were uncovered and they weren't adding any sand into the littoral drift. And so there's unknown effects of what happened. And that's, I think, goes back to like why we want the people of Nantucket to make a decision on the use of these on public beaches, because it has consequences to the whole island. And I think another point to what you asked about, like the future, how would this bylaw affect the future? Let's say the sewer beds were getting eroded. This wouldn't affect the sewer beds because that's town-owned land. This is only when a private or non-governmental entity wants to use our public beach, because Rick has said it affects the whole island. The whole island is one system. And as a side note, we're using the Coastal Resiliency Plan to formulate a plan for the whole island. And we would really like Nantucket to slow down with the erosion control projects till we just have a coastal resiliency plan where we say, well, we should make the town of Nantucket our priority and designate where we need erosion control projects. We're probably going to need erosion control projects in some parts of the island, given the trend we've had with sea rise and warming. So this is not like, never do an erosion control project in Nantucket again. This is not even close to that.
Well, and it sounds like it's important for Nantucketers to understand a couple of things. One is the impact of putting these measures on town-owned land. The second part being the difference between a soft structure and a hard structure, and the impact that a hard structure can have, and the need for mitigation, which is a nice way of saying you need to replace all of the sand that would naturally be present in this ecosystem that is now being stopped by a hard structure. And right now, SBPF, or the Sconset Beach Preservation Trust, is paying for that.
Correct.
But is that, forever? And ultimately, what happens if there's not enough money, or what if we're looking at this across the island?
Or not enough sand.
So it sounds like there's several big pieces to consider when we talk about erosion control methods. And one of the other points that you made is talking about the effect on the beach. And I think that's another part that Nantucketers need to understand, is not only is there the erosion control and the impact on, say, the homeowners or the town, the roads, the infrastructure, but then on the other side of that is the beach. And in Nantucket, we have to be mindful that that's a huge natural resource of ours, is the beach. It's what brings a lot of people to the island. And what is the effect on the beach if we put a hard structure in place? Do you want to talk a little bit about what happens to a beach without mitigation, without that natural sand that comes from a bluff feeding the beach?
Well, I think it's clear, as we tried to say a little bit earlier, that these are the geotubes are really quite sizable. These are very large structures, and in the case of the installation in Sconset, I would hazard that once they're placed down, that's a third of the beach as it exists today.
A third.
And it's dead underneath. So there's no more beach there. There's no living, whoever lives in the beach, right? The snails, the darters, help me, Spruce.
There's no life under there.
There's no life under there, right? And so right off the bat, that's what happens to the beach.
Right.
And I think it's clear if you look at other hard structures around the state. I often refer to Marshfield and Situate, where they have rock revetments, and the beaches over time, it doesn't happen in a year or 3 or 5, but those structures have been there for 50, 60 years, and those beaches have eroded right up to the hard structures. And there's no replacement of those beaches. They are just gone. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, I can even give you a Nantucket example that volunteering for the Nantucket Ironman's relay, we ran along the beach on the North Shore from like Jetty's Beach down all the way to Lake Pocomo, and there's a whole bunch of what are called groins, they run perpendicular to the beach. Mm-hmm. These are made out of rock. And what happens is at these, that where the groins are, the sand builds up on one side, but on the other side, there's no sand at all. Mm-hmm. And so the runners, when they were trying to run along the beach, they would have beach to run on one part of the groin, then they'd hop over the groin, and they were running in water because there was no beach there. And it was, you could see it all the way along. And they, not only that, but they also had to jump. Like, there wasn't like a beach there anymore. There's, some sand, and then all these rocks, and then no sand, and just water right up to the cliff. And then So it just, you can see it actively happening even on Nantucket, where you put something that's hard and stops sand from moving. Well, you give it here, but you take it from here.
Right. Right, that's a great example and something everybody could go and see, really the impact of a hard structure.
Right, and then this is different. We have to continue to recognize they are mitigating, they're putting sand on top. Whether it's sufficient is going to do the job in the long run is another question.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're similar. Yeah, just that if with hard structures that you don't add sand to, that's what happens is you have no beach. And in Situate is another example. Like they even nourish the beach there, but a storm will take it away. There'll be no beach again.
Well, and I think sometimes the language is confusing to people when
I
you
agree.
talk about nourishing or you talk about mitigating. Really what we're talking about is trucking sand in and dumping it on the beach.
Right.
Correct.
At whatever cost that may be and whatever sustainability equation that may be.
Right, there's sort of side impacts from bringing that sand to the roads, to the people who live along the roads, and there are 1,000 dump trucks a year now. With the expanded project, there might be 4,000 dump trucks. It's a significant inconvenience, to say the least, to the people who live along the truck route.
Right, so it's a large equation that we're thinking about. How do we manage this?
And again, maybe that's why it should be not just be the select board members that are
Right.
deciding this, because there's so many far-reaching impacts with something like this that a private use of a public beach that for erosion control that we should think about the big picture and ask the town people to.
So that kind of goes into why now? Why is this article relevant now?
Well, it's relevant now because of the request by the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund to expand the project from 900 feet to something like 3,800 feet, almost a mile. And the Board of Selectmen has allowed that request to go to the Conservation Commission. And if we didn't bring this article forward, it might well be that the Selectmen would choose again to use the same logic they did last time, if the Conservation Commission approved the project, to license SBPF's project without coming to town meeting. Again, which was never the intent of the article in the first place.
And can you again say how large that proposed?
Well, I think
shift
we have 900 feet roughly now
Okay.
in the temporary project. It was temporary, but people sort of change their mind after a while. They don't really mean it being temporary. And they want to expand it to just under a mile.
Just under a mile.
Yeah. So that's a significant increase in the length of the project, and that's a significant increase in the amount of sand that has to be mitigated that otherwise would be going into the littoral drift and feed our beaches around the island.
That is a substantial.
So I think it's something we do need to do now. And actually, one of the proposals was to approve the current project and help study things for another period of time, because it's 3 years or maybe 4, depending on how you count, really isn't enough time to get the full impact of the geotubes.
And that's how long this project has been in place?
Yes.
Okay. Didn't we read that your article would usurp the power from the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, it was said in the paper, but the article doesn't usurp the power. The town already voted to make the change in the bylaw. Was it 2012?
Yes.
In 2012, and as Rick said, that the select board found a way to label it a private-public partnership instead of just a private entity using a public beach. And I don't know what the logic was behind that, but they used that logic, and they were able to approve or license the project without a vote at town meeting, trying to close that loophole up with the wording. I mean, really, in our article, we're changing a few words and then crossing out a couple of the article or the bylaw has a few sections, and we're just crossing out some of the sections.
The bylaw had paragraphs A through E,
Right.
and paragraphs A through D depended initially on the moratorium.
Right.
The moratorium has expired,
Right, so
and all those sections are moot. They have no impact on any of the activity going on
So
today.
we want to cross out some of those paragraphs that don't have any relevance to this, and then just change a few words so that really they couldn't call it a private-public partnership and circumnavigate town meeting.
So that's really the key.
It's really the key. It's really simple. It really boils down to closing a loophole that they found in Catherine Flanagan Stover's original change to the town bylaws.
Great.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a non-binding ballot question in April at annual town election asking the town to take appropriate actions in a time of climate change and rising sea levels in order to preserve Nantucket beaches?
Correct.
There was indeed, and I think the vote was probably, 80% in favor of the non-binding ballot question, where voters expressed their concern about our beaches, and I think they are looking for action to make sure they're preserved properly. You know, it's maybe just back up a second. For example, the basic premise of property owned by the town is that it cannot be disposed of or sold or have other impacts on it without the voters expressing their approval. And one of the things that's happening here, at least as I think about it, roughly 4 acres of town-owned land is going to be used permanently. This project is not meant to be temporary. So it's almost like a permanent disposition, almost like a sale without it being a sale. And it seems to me we should not be trying to get around that by the kind of vote the Board of Selectmen took before. I was on the board then. Rather recognize that it is such a significant change, it ought to go to town meeting.
So if we think about this in the big picture sense, what do you think is important for voters to know when they think about this article?
Well, I think the important thing is that the article is not really bringing any new restrictions or any new ways to look at this. They're really clarifying the bylaw that was passed in 2012. I think contrary to the selectmen who are saying we're taking something away, we're trying to bring back to town meeting a power that they've already had. Town meeting should have a say over such an extensive use of its land. Just an example would be the affordable housing project at Fairgrounds Road is going to be accomplished via a 99-year lease of that property to a developer. The town recognized that town meeting should vote on that kind of a use of town property. And it brought an article to town meeting. It said, here's what we're going to do. And town meeting approved, gave the authority to the Board of Selectmen to enter into a 99-year lease of the property. I think, in effect, the same thing should happen here. The board should not want to act without the approval of town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not trying to usurp power. It's trying to actually I feel like it's trying to give the select board more power.
Well, and I think too, if we think about who owns the beaches on Nantucket, we go back to, again, that town and private partnership. If this is town land and it's a beach and Nantucketers own that town beach, shouldn't they have a say in what happens to it?
Right.
And one of the
It's
things,
a simple, direct way to say it, Sonny.
Yeah, and one thing I've learned from working with the Coastal Conservancy is Nantucket has a very unique charter with its people, where there's parcels of land that have been put aside for the use of the people of Nantucket from the very beginning of Nantucket. And they talk about the proprietors, the original people that surveyed and divided up Nantucket. They made they went out of their way to say anything around the bodies of water, the great ponds, the ocean is all for the people of Nantucket, that in perpetual, forever. So, I mean, I think we have a very strong tradition of that here, and I think that really kind of gives more, power to this idea that the people should decide how we're going to use public spaces, and like Rick said, in a significant way, so.
What happens if this article doesn't pass?
Well, one way to respond to that is I think we believe, even with the current bylaw that the project should be brought to town meeting. We would disagree with town council's opinion, and so hopefully the same action would take place by the selectmen. Some members of the select board have already expressed their personal views that it is appropriate to have a town meeting vote on this project. Whether that will come to be without this passing, I don't know. That would be my hope. So we'll just have to wait and see.
What is a special town meeting to?
Well, the Board of Selectmen called a special town meeting, which they have for a number of articles related to the marijuana situation and some capital articles and so forth. Because the Coastal Conservancy felt time was important, the citizens have the right to call a town meeting by a petition having 200 or more signed signatures. And so one way to have that town meeting is at the same time as one that is already scheduled. And that saves effort and work on behalf of the town. So we designed the timing and the petition so that once we collected our signatures and presented it to the board, they have to call a meeting within 45 days. And the idea was that they could then hold this town meeting at the same time as the previously scheduled town meeting, which is what they did. And they've simply referred to it as Special Town Meeting 2, Roman numeral 2. And it has a certain time. It's scheduled to occur at 7:30. The regular special town meeting starts at 6.
Fantastic. It does seem, when you think back about the whole trajectory, that voters in Nantucket have said that the beaches are important to them. They want to say in what's going on with the town land. There's been a lot of education around what these structures are, what options there may be moving forward. And now we're just perched at this place where we need to think seriously about what does the future of Nantucket look like? What does erosion control look like? And this is an opportunity for town voters and taxpayers to really come out and make their voices heard.
Great.
Excellent. So can you both remind us when special town meeting is?
October 10 is the special town meeting. Begins at 6 o'clock at the high school auditorium.
Mary P. Walker.
The
Auditorium.
Mary P. Walker Auditorium, the regular place. And all Nantucket citizens know where it is. So we hope there will be a good turnout.
And is there a website where people can learn more?
Well, people can always learn more about the special town meeting through the town's website.
Yeah, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, so it's worth checking out the pictures and seeing the impact of the project. And then getting out there and going to town meeting and casting your vote.